Welcome back to Reformed Thinking. We are doing a deep dive today into a concept that really sits at the center of Christian accountability and, well, assurance, too. The whole idea of a divine standard of approval. We've gathered a lot of source material here, some very detailed linguistic studies and theological work that all focus on a specific family of Greek terms. Our mission is to take those technical insights out of the lexicon, and turn them into a working understanding of what it means to be considered acceptable, or on the other hand, rejected in God's eyes. And this isn't just an academic exercise. It's about getting a handle on the seriousness and also the comfort that's found in God's sovereignty over who gets validated.
It is, and that standard is really defined by three Greek words that are all connected. You have dokimazo, which is the active verb, the process of testing or examining something. Then you have dokimos, which is the result, the state of being approved, genuine, certified. And then its opposite, Adokimos, which is, well, it's pretty stark. It means rejected, failed, or just fundamentally disqualified.
And the weight of this word group comes from the fact that it sets the terms for final acceptance or rejection, not just in some abstract way, but across our conduct, our spiritual health, and yes, the final judgment.
Right. And what's so interesting is that the concept starts in very practical, almost mundane settings. The historical background, before it ever gets applied to the soul, is all about rigorous technical inspection. We're talking about the refiner's fire, verifying if a substance or a person met an external verifiable standard.
Okay, so let's start there. In the ancient world, in the marketplace, if we trace this word group back, what's it all about before we even get to the New Testament?
Well, the likely root is a word dokai, which means watching.
Watching.
Yeah, and it suggests a very careful, fixed gaze, not a casual glance. It's the difference between, say, scanning a page and doing a detailed audit. So if something is called dokimos, it means it has survived that level of scrutiny and been certified as the real deal.
And the most vivid, the first application of that kind of scrutiny is with things like metals and coins, right?
Oh, yeah.
Quality control.
Absolutely. Just think about the Roman economy. A coin has the emperor's face on it, but that's only valuable if the metal itself is what it claims to be. Dokimos refers to an object that's been tested and found genuine. The Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, uses it this way all time.
And this is where we get that powerful analogy that runs all through Scripture.
Yeah.
The refining fire.
That's right. Fire is the test. It's the means of verification. You take a lump of gold or silver, you put it in the furnace, and you heat it up. That heat forces a separation. The true metal separates from the impurity. The dross, the Hebrew word for that is sia.
So if the silver comes out pure, it's dokimos.
It's proven genuine. But if it has too many impurities, it's either thrown out or it has to go through more refining, which is, a painful process. We see this in Genesis and 1 Chronicles, for instance.
That image is so critical. The test isn't optional. It's actually required for verification. It's a standard that just strips away all pretense. The fire doesn't care about what an object claims to be.
No, it only cares about its actual composition.
And that same practical, verifiable test was then applied to people, especially people who are being considered for public trust.
Yes, dokimazo in the classical world meant to test or to examine someone before approving them for an office.
So what did that look like? If you were a candidate for a civic role, what was the test?
Writers like Plato and Xenophon give us a good idea. When they were testing candidates for state office, the examination was really comprehensive. They weren't just checking your family connections or your education. They were verifying your fitness for the role. And maybe most of all, your character. The person seeking office had to prove their integrity, their capability for the job. You were only accepted as a magistrate after you passed the dokimazo.
So the key expectation was reliability.
It was. If a public figure was deemed dokimos, it meant they had shown they were reliable under scrutiny. They were worthy of public trust.
There's a really interesting example of this from Josephus, right, with the Essenes.
Yes, a fascinating one. The Essenes were this ascetic Jewish sect. And their whole initiation process was built around this idea of attestation, of proving yourself.
I think he mentions a 2-year probation period.
That's it. The character, to othos, of a novice who wanted to join the Essenes was tested, it was dokimazotai, for 2 full years before they were accepted into the community.
So they're just watching them.
They're watching everything, how the person acts under stress, how they handle temptation, whether their outward behavior matches their inner character. It was a long, very intense vetting process, and you only got in if you demonstrated a reliable character.
And it wasn't just for people. Xenophon uses the term for objects, too.
Yes. Anything that was vital had to be verified. You had to test the quality of horses for the military or the fitness of your weapons before a battle. All of this required dokimazo. The horse has to prove its speed, its stamina. The sword has to prove it won't break. Anything that required reliability had to be certified as dokimos.
So all of this background really sharpens the meaning of dokimos for us. It isn't just a simple declaration of acceptance.
Not at all.
It's a statement that this person or this thing has successfully met a standard after going through some kind of intense trial. It's passed the test.
Exactly. And you even see Philo, the Jewish philosopher, starting to apply this to the spiritual life. He uses dokimos for souls that are accepted into God's circle of friends.
So these are souls who were proven faithful.
Right. And the concept carried this inherent weight. You don't just passively become a friend of God. You become a friend of God by passing the trials and showing that your spiritual character is genuine.
So, okay, when the New Testament writers pick up this language, they are basically telling us that the God we serve doesn't grant approval based on, say, feelings or appearances. He grants it based on verifiable, demonstrated character that's been proved in the fire.
That's it. The place of scrutiny shifts. It's no longer the city council or the jeweler.
It's God himself.
This is where the word group gets its huge theological leverage. The New Testament applies dokimazo to that tension at the core of the Christian life. We've received salvation, but we are also living with an impending judgment. So our whole existence is under divine testing all the time.
And the Old Testament had already laid the groundwork for God as the great scrutinizer. You have the psalmist praying, "Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart." That's an invitation to a pretty intense inspection.
That awareness of God's constant testing is everywhere. Paul even uses the active participle to define God in 1 Thessalonians 2.4.
Yeah.
He says, God is dokimazon das kardias homen, he who tests our hearts.
Right, and Paul is using this to defend his ministry, isn't he?
He is. He's saying that he and his fellow workers weren't trying to please men. They were approved by God, and that's why they were entrusted with the gospel office.
That's a huge statement against the people who are questioning his authority based on things like how well he could speak or how much money he had. He's basically saying our call is genuine because God approved us for it.
Exactly. Their apostleship wasn't about a popularity contest or visible success. It was based on the secret, sifting counsel of God. God tested their inner motives, their consciences, and he found them fit for the job. That is the only validation that counts.
The prophet Jeremiah takes this imagery even further. He connects God's testing of an individual's heart to these large-scale historical judgments against the entire nation.
Yes, Jeremiah 11.20 says that God is the Lord who tries the reins in the heart. The reins there, that's the innermost being, the seat of your motivations and will. So God's testing isn't random. It's a process that's woven into history itself. And then Jeremiah 6, the image just becomes brutally visceral. God appoints Jeremiah to sift the people. He uses that image of the purifier of metals. God says, I have made you a tester of metals among my people that you may know and test their ways.
So God is telling Jeremiah, you're my assay officer. Your job, your whole ministry is to expose the dross.
And what's the result of that test on the people of Judah? God says, they are all grievous revolters. They are bronze and iron. They are all corrupters. The bellows are burned. The refiner refines in vain, for the wicked are not plucked away. It's a painful conclusion. God's testing fire didn't remove the wickedness because the people were just so fundamentally debased. The whole process ends not with purification, but with God's final rejection, Adokimos, of a whole generation that failed the test of covenant faithfulness.
And this leads us straight to the Last Judgment, which the New Testament presents as the final moment of this ongoing divine scrutiny.
The Last Judgment is the definitive moment. It's when all human life and all our achievements are put to the test. The classic text here is 1 Corinthians 3.13, where Paul talks about the building work of Christian ministers.
Right, he talks about some building with gold, silver, and precious stones, while others are using wood, hay, and straw, and the fire is coming to test the whole thing.
The fire will prove the value, the quality, the inherent worth of each person's work. The Greek is to dokimosai. The fire will test it. Now, this is a key point for you listening. Paul makes a distinction between the work and the worker. The worthless materials, the wood, hay, straw, they get burned up by the fire, but the worker is saved, yet, as he says, as through fire.
That distinction is so comforting, but it's also deeply sobering. It tells us that our salvation is all about Christ, but the effectiveness and the genuineness of our Christian labor are put to the same rigorous test as a piece of metal.
That's it. The fire of judgment validates the genuine product. the gold and silver, and it destroys the fake or temporary additions, the hay and straw. So the test isn't about salvation, it's about spiritual quality and motive. The person who has proven himself in life and whose work passes that fire test of judgment, that's the one who is dokimos.
And the reward for being proven genuine is spelled out by James.
James 1.12 gives us the direct connection. Dokimos genomenos lopsetai ton stephanon tos eus. Having become proved, he will receive the crown of life.
So the crown isn't just given out automatically.
No, it's the promised reward for those who endure the trial and are found to have a true, verifiable character.
This whole framework of divine testing gets back to that tension Paul had with the Corinthians. They were looking for validation based on human categories.
They were. The Corinthians were obsessed with outward signs of spiritual authority, impressive speeches, flashy displays of charisma, and they judged Paul and his friends harshly because they didn't have that worldly polish. Paul just confronts this vanity directly in 2 Corinthians 10:18.
What's his main response there?
He just draws a line in the sand. He says, "It is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends."
He just pulls the rug out from under their entire system of evaluation.
He does. Human categories, fame, reputation, appearance, they are totally irrelevant to the standard of divine attestation. God and God alone issues the final verdict on who is dokimos.
So if the ultimate validator is God, who looks at the heart, then our effort should be focused entirely on aligning our character with it. His searching eye, whether the world or even the church happens to notice or not. This reality of constant testing is really what defines the believer's experience.
Yes, and that's why the early church, which lived under this constant external pressure, persecution, oppression, social alienation, saw that situation of affliction, or thlipsis, as the very crucible for proving one's faith.
The situation for the community of Christ was never abstract. It was often painful. Thlipsis, that word for pressure, it was the default setting. But Paul takes this negative reality and turns it into a positive mechanism for creating spiritual stability and strength.
This is that famous chain of spiritual virtues in Romans 5. It's worth breaking down how dokime fits into that progression.
So Romans 5 verses 3 and 4, it shows a logical step-by-step process.
It does. Affliction works patience, or hypomone. Patience works dokime, and dokime works hope. And dokime is not the process of testing, but the quality that results from it. Proven character or verifiable proof.
So it's the spiritual metal that's been put to the fire and come out whole.
Yes. The basis of your attestation is the patient faithfulness that continues despite the crushing weight of negative circumstances.
In that sense, dokime is the concrete evidence that your faith is real. It's the thing that assures you that the hope you have isn't just wishful thinking, but it's grounded in a tested reality.
And this ability to face suffering with spiritual stability is why both James and Peter tell believers to find joy in these moments of trial.
Which seems completely backward to our modern way of thinking, where we try to avoid all discomfort.
It does. But James 1.2 says to count it all joy when you fall into various temptations, parasma poikolai. And Peter echoes this. He says that being grieved by various trials is necessary so that the testing of your faith can achieve its purpose. The thought underneath it all is that affliction and trial are reasons for joy because they perform this necessary testing function. They reveal the genuine article inside you. A believer should welcome the testing because it reveals what is true.
Okay, let's focus on the term for that resulting proven worth, to dokimion. It's related to dokime, but maybe it points more to the tangible result.
Dokimion is the neuter form of the adjective that means tested or genuine. It's often translated as proof or proven character. So James 1.3 explains that the testing of your faith, to dokimion humantas pistets, produces endurance.
There's a slight debate here, isn't there? Does dokimion mean the means of testing the trial itself or the genuine character that the test revealed?
There is, but while some argue for the means, the context, especially when you look at 1 Peter, strongly suggests it's the resulting quality. Peter connects the two ideas so clearly in 1 Peter 1.7. He says the genuineness of faith proved in suffering is much more precious than perishable gold, which is tried by fire.
That is a shocking comparison. Why is proven faith more precious than refined gold?
Because gold perishes. But faith, when it's been proved by God, does not. Gold is tested by fire to verify its purity, but faith, the faith that has survived the trial, is the result that lasts forever. Dokimion signifies that proven, genuine character of faith that has come out of the furnace, authenticated, and ready to be presented to Christ when he is revealed.
And this idea of attestation isn't just about internal patience. It has to show up in active, verifiable conduct and ministry.
Oh, absolutely. Faithfulness in ministry is a central way this is shown. Paul praises Timothy to the Philippians, and he points to his dokime, his proven character, which was demonstrated by the fact that he served faithfully with Paul for the gospel, as a son with a father.
So Timothy's track record, his actual verifiable actions, that's what constituted his approval.
That's it. And the Corinthians, who were so quick to judge Paul, they were themselves challenged to provide dokima, to provide proof of their own spiritual health through their material generosity.
Right. Paul uses the collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem as a kind of test case.
He does. He tells the Corinthians he wants them to give proof, dokime, of their genuine love and obedience through this collection. So obedient sacrificial conduct, in this case, being generous to people they had never even met, that serves as the objective verification of their subjective claim to spiritual health and love for Christ.
What's really surprising, though, is Paul's view on internal division, on heresy within the church. He seems to suggest that even these painful, negative things have a divine purpose in this whole testing process.
He does. In 1 Corinthians 11:1, he makes this very severe claim. He says, divisions, heres, must necessarily arise, so that the dokimoi, those who pass the test, may become manifest among you.
So heresy is a test of discernment and allegiance.
It is. It forces you to make a choice. The dokimoi are the ones who stand fast in sound doctrine, who cling to Christ, and who refuse to break the body into pieces over worldly or false intellectual ideas.
It's like a spiritual filtration system. It uses internal stress to separate the genuine from the counterfeit, to expose who has true character and who is just following a trend.
And the final conclusion here is that the main demand on every Christian is to present oneself as dokimos to God. Paul tells Timothy to strive to present himself to God as an approved worker, spoutasin sauran dokimon peristeos etutesh. And that approval is based on excellent achievements in gospel ministry, on disciplined service, and on behavior that other people recognize as the mark of a valuable disciple of Christ.
It really moves the Christian life away from being just a passive receiving of grace to an active, disciplined, striving toward a verifiable, God-approved character. The seriousness of this standard becomes crystal clear when we look at its opposite, Adokimos. If dokimos carries all the weight of divine acceptance, then Adokimos means, well, complete theological devastation.
It is a complete reversal. It means rejected, failed, spurious, worthless base. It means you have failed to meet the necessary, divinely mandated standard. If dokimos is the purified gold, Adokimos is the counterfeit coin or the metal that failed the quality check. It was just thrown on the scrap heap.
And historically, the Old Testament used this same metallurgical image for moral failure.
Yes, in Proverbs 25:4, it's used for the dross that's purged from silver. Isaiah 1:22 uses a Hebrew term that the Greek later translates as worthless silver. The metal just has no inherent purity or value, so it's rejected. Philo also used this idea for worthless words, desires, and deeds that are typical of a foolish person.
One of the most stark examples of this idea of worthlessness applied to creation is in the book of Hebrews, where it connects the failure to produce fruit with a judgment of rejection.
Hebrews 6:8 uses Adokimos for barren soil. The soil had received the rain, it was meant for cultivation, but instead all it produced was thorns and thistles. It is Adokimos, and near a curse because it has failed its whole intended purpose. It's judged by its lack of expected works or fruit. It's deemed unusable, unfit for what the master needs.
That is a terrifying parallel for the spiritual life, that usefulness is the measure of approval.
And Paul makes the threat of being Adokimos intensely personal, especially for anyone in ministry. He uses this dramatic analogy of the ancient games like the Olympics in Corinth.
That's 1 Corinthians 9:27, where he talks about rigorously training and disciplining his body.
Yes. Paul says he trains his body like a slave, mopus alis crexes autos adokimos chinumai, for fear lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. The term adokimos here doesn't refer to losing the final race. It refers to the judge eliminating a contestant who failed the mandatory preliminary examination.
So the fear isn't just about missing the prize, it's about being declared unfit to even get on the track in the first place.
Precisely. The athlete had to pass a very stringent physical and moral test before the games even started. Being Adokimos means being deemed unqualified. It means having preached the authentic truth, but failing to embody the self-discipline and authentic character that's required for the crown. The fear of disqualification, of being exposed as a fraud, was a powerful driver for Paul's own rigorous self-control.
And this word gets its most severe usage when it's not just applied to works or discipline, but to the mind itself. That's in Romans 1:28, describing the judgment on godless humanity.
Oh, this passage uses the word group with just astonishing force. It's a devastating linguistic link. Paul says that because they did not approve, the verb is uk edokimazen, to have God in their knowledge, they failed to deem him worthy of recognition. So God, in turn, gave them over to an Adokimon noun.
So they refuse to pass a judgment in God's favor, so God hands them over to a mind that is itself rejected, an unapproved, debased, corrupted mind.
It's a judicial action, a divine abandonment. The mind is made incapable of sound spiritual or moral judgment. It's unfit to properly discern truth and virtue, and that leads them to do things they should not do. Tamo katikonta. This condition, having an Adokimon noun, it signifies a complete determinative outlook that has just utterly failed the standard of attestation before God.
Which suggests a kind of spiritual incompetence so deep that they are incapable of any genuine good.
That's borne out when Paul describes those who oppose the gospel, like the heretics in Titus 1:16. He defines them as corrupted in their intelligence and radically adokimoi, unqualified, useless, or incapable for any good work. Their distorted minds make their actions worthless in God's sight. The state of Adokimos is one of total rejection, and it results from a life that refused the standard of God's scrutiny.
So, given the gravity of that divine standard and the terrifying possibility of being found Adokimos, the Christian life must include a constant, serious, ethical duty. We have to check our own spiritual accreditation.
We do. If God is the ultimate tester, why is self-examination needed?
Right.
It's because we live by faith and we are so prone to self-deception. Self-testing is the believer's necessary act of lining up our internal assurance with the objective divine standard. We're called to test our own spiritual proof. Hutus dokimazera. Examine yourselves, as Paul challenges the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 13:5.
And Paul throws this challenge out at the height of his dispute with the Corinthians when they were questioning his authority. He just flips the script on them.
He does. He asks them to test themselves for one simple reason. Unless you should be void. The Greek is emidi adokimoi este. Unless you yourselves are fundamentally unapproved or disqualified. He hopes that in their own self-scrutiny, they will confirm that they are dokimoi, and by doing that, they'll have to confirm that the apostles they were criticizing are also uk esmen adokimoi, not unapproved. The challenge is severe. Look at your own life before you presume to judge those whom God has attested.
And this required self-scrutiny becomes especially urgent in the context of our corporate life, particularly when observing the Lord's Supper.
Yes, 1 Corinthians 11:28 is a direct command. It comes right after Paul describes the chaotic and undisciplined way the Corinthians were celebrating the Lord's Supper with this blatant disregard for one another. They are challenged. Dokimazo de amkrupos hiokontan. Let a person test himself before participating.
What specifically were they failing to test in themselves?
They were failing to test their attitude toward the body of Christ. And that means both the physical body of the Lord, represented by the elements, and the body of believers, represented by the community. They were approaching Christ's presence carelessly, without reverence or love for their neighbors. Self-scrutiny requires checking our immediate motive, our current moral standing, and our relationship with the community before we come to Christ's table. To fail this test is to eat and drink judgment on yourself.
This duty of testing goes beyond just personal accreditation. It extends to testing and proving what God desires of us. How does the renewal of the mind connect to this?
Romans 12:2 explains that spiritual transformation metamorphosis, we're being continually transformed, is achieved through the renewal of the mind, is to dokimazin hemesti tutalama tutio, so that you may verify what the will of God is. The renewed mind gains the ability to critically evaluate and approve God's will. It's not passive acceptance, it's an active spiritual and moral discernment that proves through experience that God's will is good, acceptable, and perfect.
So we're constantly putting God's principles to the test in real life and verifying that they're true. And this duty then has some specific areas of ethical discernment.
It does. First, we're told to discern what is fitting in a given situation. Philippians 1:10 tells us to test tet differanta. What things differ or are morally fitting, so that we may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ. This requires constant calibration. Second, the basic rule of life is testing what is pleasing to the Lord, dokimazon which we see in Ephesians. Our actions should never be governed by, whim or selfish desires, but by the seriousness of determining what delights the Lord.
And we also have a clear instruction about religious phenomena and doctrine. We can't just accept everything that claims to be spiritual.
Absolutely not. The general rule is simple, but it covers everything. Pate de dokimazete te kelon kadachete. Test all things, hold fast what is good. That's 1 Thessalonians 5.21. And John commands us to test the spirits. The church has an obligation to verify the authenticity of every spiritual manifestation, every claimed prophecy, every doctrine. We have to reject what is suspect and hold only to what has been certified as true and good by the divine standard.
And finally, we see Jesus criticizing his own contemporaries for failing this very act of discernment. He connects spiritual testing to history itself.
Luke 12.56 is just a biting reproach. Jesus sees their skill at predicting the weather. He says, "You know how to evaluate the appearance of the earth and of the sky. How is it that you do not evaluate this present time?" Ellen Karen Tutton.
They were experts at reading the clouds for rain.
But they completely failed to discern the crucial eschatological time, the arrival of the Messiah, when a decision should have been made about him. Their failure to verify the spiritual meaning of historical events led directly to their refusal to approve Christ.
They were dokimos at being weather watchers, but adokimos at being spiritually discerning citizens of the kingdom.
And this brings us to the final, ultimate act of rejection in the New Testament, which is expressed by this intensified verb, dokimazo. This means to throw out in the test, or to find utterly unworthy and discard.
And what gives this concept its greatest theological irony is that the figure this ultimate rejection is applied to is Christ himself.
This is the deep paradox that sits under the entire Christian concept of approval. Jesus quotes Psalm 117 to the chief priests and elders after the parable of the wicked husbandman. He says, "Lithon hon apodokimazon hoi okodomontes." The stone which the builders rejected, found unworthy in the test, has become the head of the corner.
The builders there, they represented the established religious authority, human wisdom, human insight. They scrutinized Christ. They subjected him to their tests of acceptability power, conformity to tradition, political usefulness, and they declared him apodokimazo. They judged him by their human, faulty categories and found him lacking.
And that rejection is the ultimate verification of the futility of human judgment. The most genuine, perfectly tested, and fully approved individual who ever lived was found unworthy by the highest human authorities. Peter picks up this theme, stating that Christ is the stone which was rejected by you builders, but which has become the head of the corner.
So our foundation as Christians is literally the rejected article. This fact completely validates Paul's argument to the Corinthians. Divine attestation stands completely outside of all human systems of judgment and criteria.
It forces us to redefine what dokimos truly means in the spiritual sense. If the world rejects you because you don't conform to its standards of charisma or success, that rejection might actually confirm your genuine character, as long as you're standing firm in sound doctrine and discipline.
So the ultimate measure of worth is not found in avoiding the furnace of testing, whether that testing comes from internal doubt, external persecution, or corporate division. True worth, being dokimos, is shown by the patient perseverance of faith in the middle of that affliction. The fire cannot consume those who are genuinely united to Christ. They emerge like refined gold, attested by God alone. This deep dive has covered a lot: the historical roots, the theological weight, and the severe counterpoint of this language of testing: dokimazo, dokimos, and adokimos. This word group demands a constant, rigorous self-scrutiny in light of a divine standard that looks past all outward appearances.
We have to get that acceptance is not automatic. It is the result of verification. Dokimos signifies the divinely improved, tested, and genuine life, while Adokimos signifies the rejected, worthless dross, disqualified because it failed to meet the verifiable standard of faith and obedience.
So, as we all go back to our regular duties, knowing that the standard for accreditation is focused on the unseen purity of the heart, how honest has your own self-testing been this past week? Where might you have avoided submitting a particular action or a thought or an attitude to that critical, Christ-centered examination? And if you ran your life through the refiner's fire, what unnecessary and worthless materials would be consumed? That's something worth watching carefully. Until next time, keep thinking.